Hi, anybody. How you like my new studio? Yeah, I'm getting up in the world. Well, actually down. Looks like the basement, doesn't it? Well, that's kind of what it is. But it's a little more private, so I'm hoping I can make videos more when I feel like it rather than when no one's around to listen to me. I don't want people to hear what I have to say in my family. Well, my wife. And in fact, that is what the subject is going to sort of be about, as I'm going to talk about my family. I have to be cautious about that because one of these days they're probably going to see this. I have to say, if you don't know this about yourself, and this is a scientific fact, what you think of other people and what really is the truth about them can be drastically different. So everything that I tell you is my perception. And then on top of that, your mind doesn't necessarily see things as they really happen. I can't explain it exactly, but what you say happened and what really happened can be quite different. I try to be accurate and factual. I have no desire to embellish my stories. If they're not entertaining or interesting just of themselves, so be it. When I talk about, some of the things I've done, driving or little things I've said to people, that is, as far as I can remember, as far as my mind sees it, exactly how it happened. The words that were actually used at that time. I don't exaggerate them or change them, which is something a lot of people do. They'll say something one way in front of that person, but when they repeat the story, they word it differently. I'm careful to try to say that's what was in my mind. That's not what I said to them as well. So let's get started. I figured I'd go back as far as my grandfathers, my grandparents, and we'll start on my father's side. And part of this is to let you understand how my parents, or why my parents are the way they are. And let's face it, as parents, we each do the best, we each do based on what we think is what we're supposed to do. I won't say we do the best we can, because a lot of times what we're doing is children are an afterthought, you might say. They're not part of the scheme of things in our lives. So, oh yeah, I got a new chair, so I'll be rocking back and forth. Sorry about that. Not really, or I wouldn't be sitting in and rocking around. So, the grandparents I knew on my father's side. First, my grandmother was not my blood grandmother. My grandfather remarried. His first wife died of cancer, lung cancer, even though she never smoked. I don't know how it affected him, but I don't think he I don't think it affected him in a good way, I'll say that. She died when my father was 9 years old. So from the time my father was 9 until he got married, he was not influenced by a female. He did not have a mother to guide him. And I'm going to share this. I understand that when my grandmother died, he wasn't that upset. Not because he didn't love his mother, but somehow he got the impression that, well, she's dead. I mean, dogs die, animals die, so this is what happens. And I understand he actually used words of that effect. My grandfather is a proud person, I know that, and a very, very hard worker, and must have been intelligent in some way, because he was a boiler repairman or mechanic. He was the last high pressure boiler mechanic working for Baltimore, so they kept him around for some reason. He then, once my uncle and my father got married, my grandfather then remarried. So he was seeing this lady for some time. She was a great person, someone you could really count on. Not that I had to really count on her that much, but I told the story of when I threw the crab apple at the van and hit it. And when she stood on that porch and looked down at that guy, he understood he was talking to a woman that was in charge. And not that she wasn't going to do right by him, but she wasn't going to let this situation get out of hand. So, and she took care of the situation with him, and once he left, then she dealt with me with a very kind hand. So she was quite a good person, and what I mean by kind hand, when I walked in the house, I wasn't afraid of her. I mean, even if she spanked me, that was fine, but I was afraid of my father finding out about it. That went to my head right away, as soon as it happened. And her first words were, "Your father will never know about this." So that might give you a taste of what she understood was wrong with my father. My grandfather, he had bought himself an orchard, just a small one, and he used that to supplement his income and keep himself busy. He liked it. He liked to be out there. He'd only spend about a half a day, drive out to the orchard, work the ground, do whatever, drink a couple shots of whiskey, and drive back to Reisterstown. And yeah, I mean, now that I look back, I guess he was an alcoholic. I don't know whether he was a mean alcoholic. I never saw him mean. I did see him stand up for me and my brother before, because of the way my father acted. And, and I appreciate that. He didn't have a problem with telling his son he was out of control. Didn't help, but at least there was somebody in your corner, So then, realizing that, my father didn't get exactly the type of nurturing that he needed. But my grandfather, again, did the best that he knew how. Again, these people were not the type that were lovey-dovey and kissy and all that kind of stuff. If you need something, they'll help you. If you don't need anything, go out and play, or, we're fixing a great meal for you. And that definitely was something to look forward to. Now, on my mother's side, I don't want to say that my grandfather was more industrious on my mother's side. He was an entrepreneur, I guess. He just had to have his own businesses rather than work for other people. He started his own paper route, the first one in the town, in Tawnytown, and so that was as a child. He started businesses, and of course he needed money to do that. Now, to do that, his father lent him money. But where did his father get his money? Well, from what I understand, my great-grandfather wasn't the nicest person. Just a grumpy person, kinda. But he didn't believe in banks, and he had his own business. He was a harness maker. And so he stored all his money in coffee cans or whatever, buried out under a tree. I have no idea where it was. I just know that he didn't put his money in banks. And when the Depression hit, he had money. And he was not hurting at all. In fact, I understand he went out and he bought people's properties. It sounds like he was a straight up businessman now. He's not gonna give you a super great deal. He's gonna buy it for the best price for himself. That's the way I understand it. And so he had money when my grandfather needed it. But the funny thing was, I never met my grandfather, which I think would have been which is a shame, because I think he could have taught me a lot about business and managing money, and plus, if he was around, he would have kept making money, and sounds like he might have been more generous. Because you would never have known that we actually had money, considering the way I lived. So anyway, his father agreed to lend him money, but he made him a deal. My great uncle was worthless, and in fact, if you ever, the Penguin on Batman, the half-hour TV show. Do you call it? It's not a sitcom. I wonder what they called it, because although it was somewhat comical. But anyway, the Penguin on there, I mean literally, the cigarette holder, the squinting, and talking like that. Yeah, that was him. So he got in all kinds of trouble. I mean, he wasn't a drunk or anything. Well, I mean, he got drunk, but he was lazy, never did much. And I can tell stories just about him alone that would rack up some time. Actually, that's one of the things here. I don't know how long I'm going to go on this, because I'll break it up into segments. So anyway, my grandfather had to keep him as a partner. He had 49%, and my grandfather had 51 on every deal. And my great uncle never did much of anything. When he had the sewing factory, he did go in there and run a sewing machine every once in a while, but it was only when he felt like it. So I guess what I'll do starting the next one is actually let's finish with the grandmothers and grandfathers. So my grandfather became quite the man around Tawnytown as far as making money, and it sounded like he got involved, and he wasn't like his father at all, my great-grandfather. He then meets, my grandmother and falls in love with her, and I just had to share this. He actually took her out on a picnic. I mean, it's like the picnic basket type thing, and the two of you just sit along a creek and listen to the water and things like that. And he sat there and he says, "You see this area here?" He says, "I'm going to turn this into a park for the community," he says. He did. He bought it. He had partners in the beginning. They all dropped out, and he kept it going on himself. He had race horses, sulky type race horses, which are called standard breds. He had a sewing factory. He owned a lot of property. I mean, houses and rental places and things like that. Had a movie theater right there on the square in Tawnytown. So he, did quite a bit. Now, he ended up passing away after my brother was born from a heart attack. So, oh yes, he also was in World War I, and came back, and he was a machine gunner, so his job had to have been really ugly, mowing down people like that. He came back, I know, with rotten feet, and so he was always anal about feet. Maybe that's why my mother was cautious with us. We always had the best quality shoes, not the nicest looking ones, but so anyway, he passed away before I was born, so I never met him. Now my grandmother, she was something else, just a little old lady. She kind of like wanted to have the huggy kissy stuff, but it never happened. For some reason we just didn't want it, and I say we, the children, and certainly my parents didn't promote it. My mother had a sister, and believe it or not, her sister was 11 years older than her. She was so much older that my aunt's first child was 11 years younger than my mother, and they kind of grew up together. So it's kind of strange that my oldest cousin was only 11 years younger than my mother. Now, my grandmother, this lady could just work non-stop. She never worked real fast. She just kept working. She had a beautiful garden. She would plant it later than anybody else, and she would start harvesting earlier than anybody else. She took care of it like a child, you might say. And I think the plants responded to her. She talked to her plants. Whenever you go up there, she could make you a meal. And that's another thing. My grandmother on the other side, oh, she used to run a household for a rich family, and she knew how to do stuff that she wouldn't even fix for us, like baked Alaska. She says there's nothing to it. She says there's nothing really great about it. She says I make, well, she never bragged, but she made the best food, and she would do preserves and stuff like that. She knew how to make food. And here my other grandmother, same way. And if you went up there, and one time she says, I'll make you whatever you want. And I said, how about pizza? And I knew she had never made pizza. But she made it. I can't tell you what she used for sauce, because she didn't have anything in a can. I mean, it was either it might have been her tomato soup that she used. I don't know. I mean, the meats and everything on it were nothing like what you would normally see, but nowadays a pizza can have anything on it, so she was ahead of her time. But you could go by her house at 2 o'clock in the morning and see the light on. She'd be sitting there at her desk, taking care of paperwork, because she had all these businesses running. She didn't really care for them that much. She liked the horses. She liked to go down there and just be around them. She was very a down-to-earth person, like all my grandparents. Very good people. They were worth knowing. I just wish I would have realized that, because I didn't learn near what I could have from them. And if there's anything I'll criticize them for, they didn't share much. They didn't impart their wisdom. I'll finish with this. Women, this feminist stuff that's going on and all. I was having an argument with my wife at the time, and my mother and my grandmother were sitting in the front seat of the car, and I said something to my grandmother. I said, Grandmother, you ever have any problems like this with your husband? She says, oh, yeah, but I just let him think he was getting his own way. And I believe it. I believe she was serious. She knew how to, without taking away his manhood, to, steer him when he was going off. I can tell you that's the way my other grandmother was. I don't think she was as gentle about it, but still, she had his respect. And so my father's father would listen, because these two women that I'm talking about, my grandmothers, they were definitely strong women. They aren't like the women of today. They're not just weak physically, but weak-minded. I mean, this is how women are, and so men as well. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like men are of any real value anymore. I mean, they've lost a lot of their strengths, and why I look up to the men of today. I mean, there's nobody out there that's of any real great leadership value. So anyway, next we'll pick up on my parents, and maybe I'll and my brothers and sisters, and maybe I'll talk about my great uncle a little more. I feel like he's worth the talking about just for the entertainment. Talk to you later.